Okay, I've got 1150 here, which means it's 550 there, so it's time to start. This presentation's on SQL Server Configuration with dbatools and dbachecks. I'm Tracy Baggiano. I've got a lot of icons on this screen, but we won't go through them all. The main one I want to point out is the easiest way to find me is databasesuperhero.com. It has all my information as far as to contact me, because like people usually can't spell Baggiano. I do a lot of volunteer work, hence why all these icons are up here. I wrote a book. I'm an MVP for what that's worth. So we'll move on to how to install dbachecks and dbatools. The main thing you need to know about installing dbachecks is that the newest version of Pester breaks dbachecks. So you need to install the old version of Pester. So I've got this command in here to help you with that, and it's also part of my scripts that you can download off my website, so you don't have to worry about, scribbling anything down or taking print screens or anything. But you do have to go with the older version of Pester, because usually people will install dbachecks and then they'll run off to the SQL community Slack channel and go, nothing works. And this is why. And then you can install the module dbachecks, which will automatically install dbatools for you, because it's a requirement to run dbachecks is to have dbatools. So what is dbatools? It's an open source PowerShell module that was developed by the SQL Server community contributing to it. I think they have over 100 contributors at this point and over 500 commandlets to help manage your SQL Server, and they're adding to it constantly and fixing any bugs that anybody reports or adding features. And they made it really to do everything you need to do through a script or SSMS. That way that you can kind of replace it and use dbatools for it, so you can script things out and automate things better, because you can do it to multiple servers all at the same time. This is a short list of some commands that dbatools has available that I use the git command to format a list of. You can get a complete list at dbatools.io/commands, but as you can see here, they've got commands for doing backups, converting things to tables, copying a number of different objects, adding objects, and just there's a slew of things you can actually do with it, and there's lots of blog articles available to help you use most of these commands. And they do have help built into it, so you can get help on any of these commands and see how to use them. What is dbachecks? Basically the same thing, or open source PowerShell module developed by the SQL community contributing to it. But it checks for SQL servers like default configuration, or you can specify what you want the configuration to be. Like, we're going to specify what we want our mail operator to be and things like that, and we can customize it to our environment, what we want certain attributes to be, so that when we test the default configuration, it tests back to what we want it to be. And it provides output to Power BI by default, which is nice because you can have a report to show to management, hey, all my stuff's green, and you can see everything that's red and go about fixing it. But you can also store it into a table or a JSON file, so you can import it into something like Kusto, which just happens to be something we use at work. And it uses dbatools functions where it can to retrieve the values to be tested. There are a few things that need to be added to dbatools so it can be tested through dbatools. And the framework for testing it underneath the PowerShell is Pester, hence why we had to install that at the beginning. That's a framework for testing, and you can actually add your own test into dbatools. We will not be covering that because of the amount of time, and covering just the basics is about an hour. So, and it has very few commands. This is actually all the commands it has available. So it's very straightforward on figuring out what you need to do and what commands you need to use for different things. And I, again, just use the git command to show these to you. The most important one we're going to be using is the invoke dbcheck, and we're going to be using the set dbc config so that we can get our values and set to what we want for our environment. Now, the get dbc check has a number of properties that you can set. So like for database mail, we can set it to where we want it to be enabled. By default, it's set to disable because we put a bunch of CIS checks in there for security compliance. We've got the whole suite of CIS checks in there for databases. We're hoping to, well, I'm hoping to have a STIG project added to it so we can do that for American government stuff. But you can also check for like if it's ever had suspect pages put in MSDB, it would flag those. Any agent alerts, your job history, you know, a failed job, different things like that. So it's pretty comprehensive in a lot of things that it tests. And if there's something you need to test, again, you can write a custom test or you can put in a issue and somebody will probably pick it up and write it for you. Or if you know how to write the test, write it and put in a PR. To call it, you just basically do invoke dbcheck, give it your instance name. You can tell it to do all checks, but there's also a way to send in just certain tags, like I can send in the CIS and only test for my security stuff. And then you update your Power BI source, and then it's actually got a command that'll start up Power BI for you. And then once Power BI is up, you do have to hit the refresh button so that it'll read the JSON file that it dumped everything into. This is what a report looks like by default. It's changed a little bit since I first started. I think there's actually more failures because people have added more tests. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you what the default looks like now. And what we're going to do, as most of this presentation, is go through code and try to get as many of the failed objects down to nothing so that you can see how dbatools can go through and configure your environment to what you need it to. And then again, you can actually pass it in multiple servers and set up your whole environment to meet your specifications. So now off to demos, because that's all the slides I have except for asking if you got questions and thanking you for attending the presentation. So let's bring up my VM here. So again, I've got this in here to install Pester. I've already got everything installed on my machine, so I'm not going to do it. At one point, I had to install the PS framework, which is outside the scope because the server was a little bit old. And then I installed dbachecks. I went ahead and run the update this morning because I'm daring and I always want the greatest and best. So if some of my commands break, maybe because of the update, maybe not. So I'm just going to show you a few commands around this issue. So the first is define a DBA command. This is a dbatools command. So you can run this and output it to a grid. La la la. And it can take a little while to run. Then you get a PowerShell and it outputs it to a grid. And you can see all the commands it has available. And then because it's in a grid, you can actually add criteria up here to search for things. So you can search for like availability group and get everything that has to do with an availability group. Because it has a synopsis, they'll usually include that. So you can go through here and narrow things down. Or you can do it by command and search for anything that has AG in it, which would give you everything that has to do with an availability group. So it kind of gives you a way to kind of search for things a little bit better if you happen to be here and don't want to go to the website to search for things. Then you also have the ability to search by tags in the using the same command. and I didn't put that out to a grid, but you can see down here, it gave me every command that has to do with SQL agent. So you can go through these commands and set up anything that has to do with SQL agent or remove objects and things like that. One of the newest ones is actually creating a new database operator. I wrote that one for this presentation because we did not have that. And then you can actually look at your DBC checks that are available in dbachecks. And I did write this one to a grid because there's a number of them. And I do not know why verbose is turned on by default in dbachecks now. It used to not be. But it gives you a number of columns with the explanation of them and what the config is set to. These config values are the ones that you use to change things. And I don't think it gives you what the default is unless there's another column over here. No, it does not. So it doesn't tell you what it's actually set to. You'd have to run a command to actually see that. But you can see there's a number of things that you can actually set to what you want it to be as far as how it checks things. And we'll be setting a couple of those, and you'll see that in a little bit. And I just want to show you basically how to get a little bit of help from PowerPoint, PowerShell. PowerPoint, that would not be good. We don't need help with PowerPoint. PowerPoint's easy. So if you run get help on any command, we're just going to use the SP configure command because that's a common thing that you change. It'll tell you it returns the level configuration and it for SP configure, and it gives you the syntax for the command on how to use it. And then if you actually wanted some examples, you could run it with -examples. And it'll give you a few examples on actually how to use a command. This would be how to set things to be on, except for let's not include max memory for some reason. You know, we want to see it, but we don't want to see what max memory is, and we'll see everything else. So just to give you a little basics on moving around PowerShell. Now we'll actually move into our report. Now we can see from our report I pre-ran before we started this that we have 125 failed items, and we're probably going to get down to, I think, about 20 or right above 30 using everything on here, because there are some we can't set because I don't have the server on the domain. So the main thing on here was SQL agent stuff, agent alerts and things like that. So that's the first thing we're going to take care of. So I'm going to clear the host down at the bottom, make it a little bit bigger so you can see things that are going on. I'm going to set my SQL instance up at the top to the name of my server. That way I don't have to worry about it ever again. And the first thing I'm going to do is set some variables up for my mail account, because that's one of the things that's failing in those reports is it doesn't have mail set up. It needs a mail address, an operator name, and an email to send things to. And of course, you know, my email domains and all that stuff are all fake. And then we can actually set our agent database mail to those variables that we have up there, so that that's what it will check against. Whoops, wrong button. How do I get that one to go away? Well, we're on a short screen now. So now we've got those set. And you don't want that. Trying to figure out how to get the bad screen to go away real quick because I hit the wrong button. Oh no, maybe there's, yeah. We'll just do that. Okay. So now we can actually get our DBC config into an out grid and see where we have set those values. And you can see we've got database mail, your mail, and DBA right here. So it has set those values for us, which is neat because that's what we wanted it to do. Now I'm going to connect to the server instance using a dbatools command because there are a couple things on here where I'm going to have to use SMO instead of dbatools because the commands haven't been written yet. And it's on my to-do list to write commands for these things so that this whole presentation will just be dbatools, but certain it's not yet. We will need this. So the first thing we're going to do is turn database mail on if it's not already on, because that will be important to do. And as we can see down here, our previous value was 0, now it is 1, so it's enabled. Then we're going to create us a database mail account using my variables that we had set up before with the email address and things like that. If it doesn't already have one with that name, with that account. And it went through and set that up. Then we're going to get our database mail profile, and this is where we're using a tad bit of SMO to set the database mail profile to what we need it to be. Oh, whoops, I accidentally moved a period while I was highlighting stuff. So we'll try that again. We may just need to remove this. Okay. Now we're going to go in and create us a new database mail operator. If our database operator doesn't exist, I always try to put these ifs in there just in case you've already ran these scripts against your servers. It would be safe to run again for configuration purposes. So we can see that it actually created our database mail operator, a DBA. Now this is another SMO part where I need to edit this and work on creating a set command so you can actually see how it's set up. But this is where we're going to add database mail and a fail-safe operator so that, you know, if there's nobody set to receive an alert, the DBA operator would actually receive the alert. Now, getting to the alerts, because we had to have all that set up just so we could set up severity alerts so we can get rid of most of what's on that report. So this is going to tell us to do everything between 16 and 25. And then I've got a few alerts in here for corruption type alerts. 1823, 1824, and 1825, and 1829 was added later. And all the errors are going to be named error, the number, and alert. They're not going to have any special names that actually tell you what they mean. And again, they don't have a way to add a new alert using dbatools, so I'll be using SMO for that. And it loops through and does that for us. So now we're going to update our data source for our report and double check to make sure no one has any questions while that is happening. Because this takes a little bit. Unfortunate part. Last time I ran in 115 seconds, so it took about 2 minutes. Let's see how fast it runs this time. So again, all this code will be available for download on my website, so don't worry about, you know, needing its availability to do anything, and you can modify it from there and have lots of fun trying to fix things and make it close to your environment. Okay, 73 seconds this time. That's cool. So I'm going to hit refresh here. And then all our alerts went away. We had 125 alerts here, I think, and we're down to 82. So one of the big things we see here is all the hologram scripts aren't set up for anything, and that's taking up a huge chunk of our 82. So that's going to be our next thing to set up using dbatools. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the bottom, set my instance name, set me up a backup location and how long I want to keep my backups for, and what the email operator will do. Now the install command will actually go out to GitHub and download the latest solution for you. One thing to note is when you download it, you can put replace existing on it and it will replace everything that's on there. You can also tell it to install jobs. So if you want to update it, you can just take out install jobs and it won't update your jobs for you, but you can still have the newest code that has been put out there and then explore what's new and see if you need to update your jobs for anything. So you don't have to worry about it replacing your jobs if you do replace existing. That's just replacing your code. So I went through here and named jobs and have created schedules based on the type of job that they are. So like I want my full backups to run Sunday at midnight, so I've created schedules for that. And again, for differentials, I want them to run at midnight, so I've got schedules for that. I want my logs to run every 15 minutes. My integrity checks Saturday at 2 a.m. I'll optimize it Saturday at 10 p.m. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can set it up, and I set it up this way. That way you would also have different examples of how to use the DBA agent schedule command, because it can be a little bit confusing because there's a lot of different options to set it up. Because that's one thing it will complain about in the report is even if you have all the Halogram scripts set up, it will complain that they aren't scheduled to run. And you don't want it to complain about that because you actually want it to run. And then the other thing it's going to say is, hey, you don't have an operator set to it to receive emails. So we're going to take any job that does not have an operator on it and set it to DBA. I didn't specify whether it's Allah's or not because not all of them start with Allah. I could do like I did up here and put them in a jobs thing and let it loop through, but I don't have any other jobs on there, so I didn't worry about that. So I'm going to set my recovery mode on my MSDB to full because that's the way I like to have it. And it'll help us out when we're running backups and checking for log backups to be ran on the system as well. Then we're going to start our agent jobs for our backups because that's one of the things it's actually complaining about is that we don't have integrity checks and agent jobs running ever on the system because I just installed SQL this morning. So it's like it's a brand new box. So of course it doesn't have backups and stuff running. So we're going to kick off those jobs and give them a few seconds to run before I go and update my source for my Power BI report. That way we can have less things on it as well. It probably has had time. If not, we'll let it disappear off the next run. And the less things you have failing, the quicker this actually runs. which I find interesting. I guess because it doesn't have to write out as much data as to why it failed. Is there any questions at this time on all the scripts or what I went over before that? Okay, we're a quiet group. That's okay. There we go. That's the last bit of the test. So 89 seconds this time. Woo! And refresh our Power BI report. Now all the scripts have disappeared, which is fantastic. So we're down to 27 failed items. We got rid of 100 of them. We did good just by running 2 things. So now we've got a bunch of things that are like, you know, the latest build, the max stop is not set. For some reason, fail-safe operators falsely reporting that. Backup compression, we need our DAC turned on. A database mail is going to show up because by default it says it's going to be false. I'm not on a domain, so that's going to show up. Auto growth configuration we're going to fix. So we're going to go through and fix some miscellaneous things as we call it here on the next go around, so that we can clean up some of these 27 items. And one's going to be the data auto growth thing because that takes up 8 of them. So as I said, I got a miscellaneous section here. We're going to clear the host and set the instance name again. So first I'm going to turn on optimize for ad hoc workloads, mainly because I like it and it's part of the report. I'm going to turn on DAC so that if the server's way out of whack, we can still log into it and check things out. Turn on our backup compression because it never hurts to compress things. Turn off remote access to the box. So we don't want people doing stuff like that. Now, as you note right here, when you do remote access, it tells you, hey, you've got to restart SQL Server for it to take a hold. And it will do this for anything that you do on the box that needs to restart. So as you set different things, just pay attention to the yellow warnings like that. So we're going to later on install the latest CU, so that will take care of our restart. So we're not going to worry about restarting it right in the middle of the demo because the latest build is going to be the last thing we do. It was also complaining we don't have who is active. So again, we will run that and let it pull it off of GitHub. Boom, SP who is active is installed. It also will complain about Brent Ozar's scripts not being there, the first responders kit. So we can get those. There are a few errors that pop up in there because of the order that it installs things, but it is installed. Couple things to note here. There's a new project out there called SQL Watch that is for watching your performance on the server. You can actually install that using dbatools. I recommend installing it on a dedicated server and letting everything go to it. That way you're not, using resources on the server that you're monitoring. One thing we're going to do is set the query store options on our MSDB database, because you cannot do that in your GUI interface. It will not show it to you that you can even turn it on. So it can take care of some performance problems if you need to. I would rename the SA account, but there's a bug in there that I need to figure out and file a PR for because it does not work. This is where we're going to take care of our auto growth, and I have a SQL file here that I basically got off the internet to figure out which ones need to be set, and then I put it into a table and told it to set the growth to a gig if it was set to 1 kilobyte or 10%, so that we could fix up our auto growth problems, because those are just yucky settings. Oh, during execution. Huh? You worked last time I ran you. Make sure that file is saved where I had it saved at. dbachecks, yes. Miscellaneous dbachecks.sql. Well, I may have to figure that one out. It worked the last time I gave the presentation. Now, one thing you can set is what trace flags you want set up. And I always like to have the one that suppresses your backups being written to the log. So we'll set that as an expected one to be turned on. And then they have a not expected one, and 117 by default is expected, but you don't need it in 2019, so we're going to turn it off. And the same goes for a 118. They have them set up as separate values, so we're going to turn that one off. If you're running versions less than 2019, you would leave those on so that you can check for those. And there are also a couple of trace flags if you're using Query Store on those lower environments that you would want to set. So now we're going to enable our trace flag that we want to enable. And it is enabled successfully, as we can see down here. And then we're going to set our max dock on our system, which I find with 2 CPUs, it never sets it correctly. And we'll go update our Power BI report in this instance, and I actually have code to run while it's doing that. So just to show you some other things that you can do with dbatools. You can actually make sure your power plan's set correctly, because we all know that every now and then it's not set to high performance. And mine happens to be, we can change our cost threshold for parallelism, because the default of 5 that was made back in SQL Server 7 is not the correct value. I start at 25 and work my way around that to see how well my system performs. You also have the ability to run Glenn Allen Berry's scripts to troubleshoot stuff and export it into a CVS files. So if you do that, it will literally run every script that he has and put it in my temp folder. And then you can go investigate problems with your server from there. It even dumps execution plans on the database. I could have picked a particular database for it to run against. I didn't, but it's just chugging away, creating me hundreds of files. So there are a few options in here where you can narrow it down where it won't like run every single thing. So it's just kind of nice that you can do that. A lot easier than running it one by one and copying it into Excel. You can also set database compression up and tell it, like, if it's going to save me 25% space, just run it on this database and save me that 25%, export it into a CVS so you know what happened on that database. So that's kind of nice. So that's all my demos for that. Let's go see if it finished running. It did not. It should be any second. And my last trick is going to be installing the latest CU that I already downloaded on there and then checking for questions. Wow, I finished a little bit early. I must be talking fast today. So now we're just down to 11 things, which is, we started off at 125, so that's great. So the last thing we're going to actually fix is this latest build, so you can see how easy it is to run CUs on your servers. Now there is the option just to tell it to download it from the internet, so you don't even have to download it yourself, which is kind of nifty. I did that on my last one because I didn't have the newest one available, and was like, how do I get it? And you just put -download on there. But I went ahead and downloaded it in this instance because you can actually put multiple computer instances here and send it out to 5 or 6 servers at a time, depending on what your availability is to take servers down and how your patching cadence is.
Momento.
Then one thing it complained about too is the Caribou settings, and I don't have an AD setting for that, but there is ways to set Caribou up using dbatools, so I included a link for that. And then if you wanted to run CIS checks for the security compliance, you can actually do that using this. This is why I was saying you can just do checks instead of doing all checks. And then you have to change your source in your Power BI report to actually go to here instead of the default. But right now it's actually preparing to install our CU on our database to take care of one last thing in our Power BI report. So we will have it down to 10 items once that is complete, and there's really no reason to wait around for that unless we really want to. So I will open it up for questions. Oops, not all the way there. Your best resources for looking at stuff right now is just the dbatools and dbachecks websites. And you can Google and get a lot of blog articles about how to do stuff. Let me answer the question in the window. And then if you got any questions, whoops, everyone. You can put them in the chat and I'll be glad to answer them. I want to thank you for your time for sitting through the presentation. And there goes my contact information again, just in case you need it. And I am very quick on answering things. My DMs are open on Twitter, so you can basically contact me there for short things. You go to my website, you can find my email and type up long things. And I'll be more than happy to try to find an answer for you on just about anything, not necessarily just this presentation. So that concludes this presentation. If you guys have questions, just stick them in the chat window.
Okay.
And we ended a little bit early, so you guys can grab dinner early, depending on where you're at.